Today's top stories with our panel. That's Emily Carver of the Institute of Economic Affairs, who's in the studio. Morning, Emily.
Good morning.
And Josh Glancy, the Sunday Times' special correspondent, who's not in the studio. Good morning, Josh.
Good morning.
We nearly got you in. We would have had a full house for the first time, but thank you for joining us. It's great to have you. Let's begin. It's a terrible story. It's a very shocking front page headline of the Times, which, if you don't pause to think about it, you might even underestimate how shocking it is. But childbirth is not safe for women in England. It's an extraordinary thing. It comes from the Donna Ockenden report into the Shrewsbury and Telford NHS Trust, and it found that between 2000 and 2019, more than 1,500 mums and children died or were left disabled or traumatised. Mums were frequently blamed in some instances for their own deaths. Emily, start with you. At some point, do we need to recognise that, and this will be an unpopular argument, I'm sure you're used to having this unpopular argument, but this is a systemic problem that could go across the whole NHS. This is a system that has its very many high points, and many people regard it as critical to what our sense of national self. It's a great achievement of politics and social policy coming together at the NHS. But ultimately, we have to recognise that for 20 years, potentially across the whole country, it wasn't safe for women to give childbirth in the NHS in England.
Yes, it's quite shocking that what they found in Shrewsbury and Telford in that particular NHS trust is not a unique experience in this country. So the report also finds in the Times that 4 out of 10 maternity units in England were rated inadequate or requiring improvement, and that's based on safety standards. So that is very, very concerning, and I'm sure there are many women in this country who are fearful as a result of that. And I think in this country we have a difficulty when we come to talk about the NHS. We saw yesterday, and it's almost ironic that this report comes out today. After yesterday, we had that polling that showed that public satisfaction with the NHS is at a 25-year low. That's not sustainable. That's not what we deserve. We're coming up to almost 40% of our public day-to-day spending going on the NHS, going on the health service. That's a huge amount of money that we're spending on this service. And if outcomes aren't reflecting that, then we have an issue. And we seem to be terrified of talking about privatisation of the NHS in this country for obvious reasons. But it doesn't necessarily have to be something that we're fearful of. I mean, we see in countries such as the Netherlands, which has a private insurance scheme, it is still universal in that everyone is insured. For those who can't afford their premiums, the government steps in and pays those for them. And they have competing providers and suppliers and insurers working and competing for consumers, and that drives up standards, and their outcomes on key measures are far higher than in this country. And I think we deserve an honest conversation about the NHS, but I'm not sure if we're going to have it because it's just such a big beast.
Yeah, Josh, I think politically that's a problem, isn't it? It was a religion, I think it's been variously described. I think Kenneth Baker described it as a religion 30 or 40 years ago. And therefore, because it's a religion, we talk about it in hushed tones rather than saying, well, what are the bits that we could improve and how could we improve them? Everyone mentions privatisation. They immediately think of the United States, which has huge problems with its healthcare system in certain respects. But there are lots of other countries around the world, socialist countries, democratic countries, countries in the West with very high standards of care, which does not adopt an NHS-style policy in the way that we do. Do you feel that there will be ever any discussion that talks about possible changes, or is it always verboten, do you think?
Well, I think there's going to have to be at some point. I mean, we are increasingly becoming a country and a government with a health service with a government attached, I should say. And, we probably actually need to spend more on the health service. If you look, we do spend sort of per capita less than France or Germany, for example. But we need to find a way to raise that money. And obviously, we're, as we saw from the spring statement, we're in a pretty tight spot at the moment financially. I do think that, yes, it does have a religious aspect to it, the NHS, but we do need to be pragmatic. And I think we're going to be forced to be by circumstance and by scandals like this, these scandals cost enormous amounts of money. I mean, the NHS has already paid out, I think, about £58 million in damages. There will be plenty more to come on this scandal. So, yeah, I think we're going to be forced into assessing it. Whether we do it now or in 20 years' time, well, that depends. But this really is a case of allowing ideology into science as well. It's not just about how we structure NHS. It's also about, not treating people as individuals.
That's an interesting point. And Alicia Kearns, the Tory MP, said the NHS is a systemic problem of sexism. And it's easy to make this rhetorical point, Emily, but I might make it anyway. That is it possible that if this was a healthcare problem affecting predominantly men, would it have taken 20 years and all of this problem to reveal this complete level of appalling treatment? Is there an aspect of sexism at work here, do you feel?
I have absolutely no idea whether there's truth to that claim. I know that men have difficulties in accessing healthcare in other areas. There's not as much awareness of cancers, for example, that affect men only, and that sort of thing. So I'm not sure if we can make statements that the NHS is sexist in a way, but I think there certainly was an unscientific dogma that was gripping these services in terms of, that caesareans weren't the way to go, and that women were treated as, well, not as individuals, but rather just, data.
I can remember, because I was giving birth nearly 40 years ago, and there was this big thing of, natural birth is the only thing, and, it's only rich women are too posh to push. That was the expression. I can remember that. So I think there's an element of that, that it was picked up because, of course, caesareans cost more than natural births. And I mean, some of these, some of it, in the end, tends to come more from the Economic Affairs Institute. It comes down to funding. Can we move on to another thing in the news today which fascinated us, which is a survey of Cambridge-based companies found widespread concern about the long-term consequences of avoiding the office. The business group Cambridge Ahead found that less interaction through all this working from home is a worry because collaboration and teamwork has deteriorated. Josh, first, what do you make of that? Should we all be crawling back into offices as Stig and I have done this morning?
Well, I'm going to sound like a hypocrite because I'm at home waiting for a plumber, but
yeah, right.
I strongly believe that we should be in the office as much as possible. Actually, I mean, it obviously varies. It depends what your work is, how collaborative it is. If you're a journalist, I think being in a newsroom is critical. Particularly if you're a reporter, not every day, not every hour of every day. I think we've broken the tyranny of the 9 to 6 commute. But I think offices are essential. I think they are places of collaboration, of serendipity, of teamwork. And I think there is a tendency, it can always feel more convenient to stay at home. You can always find a reason not to go out into the driving rain and get on the train and go into work. But actually, it's always worthwhile, again, depending on your job. So I think we've broken the tyranny of the commute. I think that's great. I think more flexibility, people able to pick up their kids, go to the doctor, all these things, that's great. But I do think we need to get back much closer. If you look at the stats, stunning shift. People were averaging 4.7 days in the office before the pandemic. They're now at 2.5. I think you want to be at about 3.5 probably. I know I'm picking that figure out of thin air. So, but it is also up to companies to make offices worthwhile, have events that are in the office, make offices pleasant places to be. We're very lucky. I mean, you're in the office now. It's lovely where we are, but some offices are quite dreary. So I think, companies and leaders have to play a role too.
The interesting thing is, isn't it, Emily, that actually everyone knew there were going to be problems in this. I remember talking to a friend who was a terribly high up and frightening headhunter at the beginning of all this, and I was saying, this working from home thing, it really works, doesn't it? Everyone's going to do it. It's going to do it. She said, no, in a voice almost like Mrs. Thatcher, get them back in or companies will collapse. And there's a very strong sense, I think, early on from some senior people that this would not be a good idea. And I'm very younger people, obviously ones who've got small children at home and so on, they tend to be keener.
Yes, and it's understandable why people want to take advantage of hybrid working. I mean, the report in the Times starts with the lions, the family time, the 10-second commute. All of that is very appealing. But I think what will be quite interesting, and I don't think we'll ever have this data because I think it would be too difficult to measure and too difficult to find, but whether those who are more visible in the office get promotions as a result or do better, end up getting pay rises and so on, because it is still important to be visible in the office. You can have those moments where you're talking to your boss that you wouldn't have had before, those moments in the cafe or at lunch or at the pub after work that are invaluable.
Used to be the smoking balcony,
smoking
didn't
area.
it? That was when the very junior people could talk to the extreme boss. I have to say,
Well, we still have a little garden for that at the IEA.
but just as lockdowns were ending and I first came into this office, I remember the absolute visceral thrill of being in an actual tall building with a view out of the actual window with real people at desks who I could make jokes with. I mean, it was different, and I'd done a great deal of distant work before that.
But Josh, I guess the thing that you're saying is that there are parts of it which are, I mean, the whole idea of working to live or living to work, that there are some days where it is better for you to work at home. You might have a project to do. You might have a problem with your kids. You might be able to honestly say to your boss, you know what, I am a parent. I'm not going to pretend I'm not a parent at work. I am a parent. I've got this issue with my kids. I need to deal with it, but I want to carry on working for the rest of the day. So it makes more sense to me to be at home. And maybe that's the thing we should cling on, that you should go to the office most of the time, but there'll be moments, days, periods where that's not convenient, and we should embrace that because that's a good thing. It might make people's lives a bit better.
Yeah, I think it's probably the single best thing to have happened from the pandemic. Obviously, lots of terrible things happened, but no, we have shattered this illusion that you need to be in the office 10 hours a day, 9 hours a day, showing FaceTime, even when you've got nothing to do or you have something important at home. That's gone. That's great. But I think the pendulum has swung a little bit too far towards sitting in your pajamas in bed and, not necessarily being that productive and not talking to your colleagues. I'm putting an article to bed today on the magazine. I'm going into the office this afternoon to do it because it's so much quicker, it's so much more efficient, and frankly better. So I think we just need to get back to sort of a really suitable middle ground on this. And I think we probably will. I think I think we're getting there.
I would just say we have seen some of the public sector certainly taking liberties on this front, and I'm sure that's the same in some private companies.
But I would just also like to throw in the fact that there is starting to be a big social divide between people who cannot ever work from home because they work in shops or they are cinema or theatre ushers or whatever, and those who can. It's starting to become a real white collar, blue collar thing very, very quickly, which I think we should think about.
That's a very good point. And I won't want to avoid my hobby horse, which is that the quality of the internet provision in this country is so awful that working from home can be an absolute nightmare as well. You'd improve productivity in this country if you just spent much more money on the internet, but I won't get into that because
on trains.
Yeah, exactly. Now this is an interesting thing we've been talking about today. Trans rights has come again into the fore. Yesterday, MP Jamie Wallace came out as transgender, was met with support, while transgender cyclist Emily Bridges has been prevented from competing in the female category despite meeting British cycling's requirements to lower her testosterone. Emily, is there a middle ground here? We spoke to Alexandra earlier, a trans woman, and she basically said she just wants to blend in. She just wants to be left alone. She has had the full operation. Her hormone levels are that of a woman. She doesn't want actually to have her existence complicated by self-identifying people who still have all the biological characteristics of men. Doing things like Leah Thomas, I think, entering swimming competitions. Do we have to try and segregate out? There's a small area where there's difficulty, women's only space is sport, and a vast area for trans people who just want to be left alone, and try and find a way of having a debate that gives respect and succour and support to that large majority, or still enables us to have difficult questions where some of the issues get a bit tricky.
I think that's exactly what we want to do. We've had sex and gender confused for so long, and the legislation doesn't help. You've got the Gender Recognition Act that allows for a transgender woman who still has their male genitalia to be considered a woman legally, whereas the Equalities Act has legal provisions for women's only spaces based on biology. So there's a conflict, and different institutions are interpreting this legislation in different ways, and a lot of women are very concerned that their rights and their identity is being eroded in some way or diluted. And I think with sports, it's interesting how sport has made this come to the fore, because it's so obvious to many people that there are still biological differences, regardless of whether you are taking hormone treatments or have transitioned in terms of appearance. And in that way, I think when it comes to sports, when it comes to women's spaces, healthcare, etc., there has to be, biological sex has to be the determining factor. And then I don't know what that means for sports, whether you have open categories, perhaps. I don't think you could have just a transgender races. I think it would have to be, an opt-in choice. But I think it's so stark that it seems unfair to women. I mean, women's sports is exclusive. That's the whole point. By definition, they are.
I mean, we had someone say that you could have a female category and an open category.
Yes.
Because ultimately it's very easy. It's very easy for men in this. If Josh agrees with this, because ultimately for Josh and I, there are no real moments where a trans man, a person who is born biologically a woman who becomes a man, has any impact on our lives. We don't require safe spaces. We don't require protection in sport. It's really easy, Josh. Do you agree with this? That for us, there's never a moment where this issue bites, because ultimately, if someone wants to become a trans man, someone is a trans man, it doesn't really have any negative implications on anyone around them in the male gender.
Except the Garrett Club.
Well, they deserve all they get. Josh, what do you think?
I think you are right, and gender critical feminists will say we'll have a go at men for not speaking up for this very reason, because it doesn't affect them, and it's a lot easier for men to just bury their heads in the sand and say, well, you lot argue about this, and we'll sort of get on with our evenings at the Garrick. But these are difficult and contested issues. It was really notable to me, the response to Jamie Wallace, and I think that's a reminder of how difficult it can be for people to embrace their gender in this way. His post that he put up was really hard to read in places, and so I think it was a useful reminder to perhaps to us, what are we sort of cis men, Stig, that it is incredibly hard. People are going through real challenges, and I think it's up to all of us to pay attention to that.
The sad thing is that Alexandra, who was on this programme a while ago and who is trans, if any natal woman said the sensible, calm things she did about acceptance and how people should have gone through the transition and so on, people would be shouting TERF at them straight away. You'd be instant TERF. So that is fascinating. It's worth listening back to that one. There's one other quick topic for you two. A theatre goer has walked out of a performance of As You Like It at the York Theatre Royal because the performance was in a Yorkshire accent. Northern Broadsides, an excellent production company, says that the performance contains unapologetic northern accents. How do you feel? Do you feel strongly about accents? You're both a bit RP, frankly. Josh?
Well, I am, although my family is from Manchester, so I obviously, on principle, think that all people from Yorkshire should be banned from the stage. But no, I mean, it's ludicrous, right? Because, gosh, if this person had gone to see Shakespeare at the Globe in the 17th century, well, they all sounded like extras from Poldark or something. I mean, clearly there is a place for accents. You want people in Jane Austen probably to sound a certain way for veracity, and people in Coronation Street to sound another way. But As You Like It, which was the play they were watching, is as far as I can remember set in Belgium or France or somewhere. So should they have soundlded like they were from Hello?
Northern Broadsides are brilliant anyway. Emily, what's it like at what do you feel about accents? Do you judge people on their accent at all?
Do I judge people on their accent? No, I don't think I do. I'm sure there have been period dramas where they've had American accents, which is a little bit jarring. I mean, it is nice to have
Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. That's the most famous one. Christian Slater and Kevin Costner.
But in Shakespeare, if you do Shakespeare in an American accent, it totally frees the language. It sounds wonderful. It really works.
That's because the Elizabethans went off to America, and so the founding fathers were around that time, the 15th, 16th century, and so the American accent is actually related to Shakespearean language more closely.
History degree, was it?
You're not buying that?
That's very interesting.
No, it is, because parts of America have pronunciation similarities to the Elizabethans and the Tudors because of the people going over to found America. Libby's not buying. Are you buying that?
I'm buying it, but I like these stories because they give such great PR to these companies that have these ridiculous complaints.
Great company. I've seen
they'll be selling lots of more tickets, perhaps.
Yeah, I think going to a play and complaining about an accent, you should just keep quiet, Robert. Get your head down. Great to speak to both of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Emily Carver in the real life studio. Maybe it will catch on. I hope you're listening to that Josh Glancy, who's doing it from home just as well, but he's going to have his plumber in. So that's an example of his life fitting into his work, and maybe we should applaud that. But he's coming into the office this afternoon. That's hybrid working for us all to see.